There was a man who had a fantasy about making the world's best sweet. He went through years leveling up his abilities to contend in the greatest rivalry. He drove his group to make a delightful phoenix made of sugar, and everybody previously thought he had won the opposition. Sadly, his life was stopped when his own treat fell on top of him in his final gasp. He began to lament how his life finished. He needed to satisfy his fantasies, yet God was treacherous nonetheless. God had different designs for himself and chose to resurrect him in a different universe. He was brought into the world as Mil Mordian, the child of an honorable general. In spite of being a respectable, his dad generally gave a valiant effort to help his kin and showed Mil the significance of being kind to others. At 9 years old, Mil was at that point prepared by his dad to turn into an extraordinary fighter. Regardless of not being awesome and wishing to turn into a cake, Mil proceeded to practice, and wonderful. Mil followed his dad with devotion, attempting to repel each hit while scarcely swinging his sword. His eyes were loaded up sincerely. The most significant fight was to pick which dessert he planned to do next. Obviously, that drove him to lose his sword. It's not equivalent to utilizing a margarine blade. In the wake of preparing, an individual came to report that it was nearly time for breakfast, and the general had a few reports to go through. The general needed to hear the words "not too far off," and afterward the individual let him know there was uplifting news and terrible news. The individual conveying the news informed him that their bean collection would have been huge. Just like Mil guaranteed them, their domain was generally infertile, which made it unimaginable for individuals to develop. Yet Factory utilized the information from the other world to work on the development and reaping interaction of their properties. In the wake of hearing the news, Factory begins giving more tips on the most proficient method to work on the cultivation, and which dishes he could make, befuddling his dad, who doesn't comprehend how his child sees such a tremendous amount about soil. Yet Mil couldn't uncover reality, that he was resurrected. All things being equal, he essentially got over it, as having insane considerations notwithstanding. The mindset immediately changed when the news showed up that 50 crooks were free as a bird and made a beeline for their town. Pa was restless, realizing the outlaws would obliterate the fields and ruin his arrangements of making sweets. He didn't maintain that criminals should destroy his fantasies. His dad needed to know the amount of they possessed to set it up was just a single month. His dad needed to assemble the locals and arm them, yet Factory realized this was insane. They would get, all things considered, 30 men altogether to safeguard the land, and on the off chance that the crooks figured out how to encompass the spot, they wouldn't have the option to get by. In the drawn out, he heard his dad's discussion: they can't request fortifications, because other close-by masters previously lost against the scoundrels, and if they figure out how to send them and win the fight. Discussion gets significantly more disappointing to Mil, who's gradually seeing the fantasy disappearing. His dad's subordinate notices it and believes he's beginning to feel the obligation of turning into the future ruler. Thus, he recommends utilizing their secret weapon, Mil's dad didn't see what he implied, yet the person made sense of it would be a bet. The general generally confided in his instinct and acknowledged what he implied by the ace in the hole, the purification service, a custom that will stir Mil's enchanted powers. Confounded, Pa had no clue about what this implied. At the morning meal table, his dad made a major declaration to the family. He let them know that Pa planned to go through a blessing function, like the transitioning function in their reality. Despite the fact that it's generally implied for 13 to 15-year-olds, Pa Dad accepted. He considered it fit. He had currently sufficient swordsmanship abilities, and he additionally was at that point extremely shrewd. Mil's mom was at first upset since she believed that he should have additional time as a kid. However, she ultimately came around and assisted him with planning for the function. His mom winds up tolerating the choice. On the whole, she needed to set him up. She requested Mil's sister, and the two began to grin at him like drags. Mil realized he was ill-fated. He needed to confront the greatest disgrace of his life, dressing in drag, and his dad essentially overlooked his call for help. What might be compared to going out to purchase milk in this world, dressing in drag was embarrassing for him, yet he needed to proceed with it. They even chose to put cosmetics all over. As of now, he seems to be a comedian. Following 3 days of misery, it was at last opportunity to go to the regal capital and complete the ceremonial. His companions were supporting him and giving him the boldness he wanted. His dad then, at that point, put his hand on his shoulder and began to recite a spell. The air around them was loaded up with energy, and in a brief moment, they were magically transported to the capital. Pa was entranced by the sights and all fixings he could use on his treats regardless of his interest. Mill was reminded by his dad that he could purchase anything he needed assuming he passed the service. He even found another organic product called bonkas, which had a sharp taste he needed to get them and attempt to fill in their area, which dazzled his dad, who thought Mill needed to foster the area and make a military. However, as you can figure, this person possibly contemplates making his sweets. When they showed up at the congregation, they met with the panda cleric. His dad believed Mill should play out the purification function to get his supernatural capacities. This function included both physical and mental difficulties. First, they measure the enchanted power by limiting the individual and making them drink a severe beverage. They then, at that point, abandon them in complete murkiness, with next to no detects. As a rule, kids begin shouting following a couple of moments, yet Mill was unique. He invested the entire time pondering making new sweets. His psyche was loaded up with fixings and recipes his dad and panda minister lacked the ability to accept it. 2 days after the fact, Mill wound up encompassed by brilliant light particles that get retained into his body. His dad and the panda minister lacked the ability to have confidence in his enchanted potential. They wake him up and take him to the last piece of the custom. The minister was going to peruse a sacred text, and assuming Pa had effectively got a magical ability, he would have the option to grasp its significance. As the panda read, Pa abruptly comprehended the sacred text was enchantment itself.